Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
How is everyone this morning?
Surviving.
Well, that's a good thing.
I
Perfect.
missed you guys in Charleston.
I was just about to
Aw.
say the same thing, Jason. We missed you while you were there. So
Oh, it was such a crazy 48 hours I went through, and just one of the luck of the draw, as the surgeon said. So,
okay. Well,
I,
hopefully you're doing better. And
yeah, getting there,
yeah.
getting there.
So I was going to throw you under the bus in Charleston. So we'll wait until Denver. I'll throw you under the bus then. How's
Well,
that?
I was gonna log in from the operating room and give my little spiel about the how we're doing out here, but I was a little doped up with the morphine and whatnot, so
That's
don't think it
okay.
would have went well.
Keith did a wonderful job on your behalf.
He's not here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, one of those things. Anyway,
Yeah.
oh,
Uh, ho-
I had a really good little presentation put together too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Save it for Denver. Just change the dates, right?
Yeah, okay,
There you
sure.
go.
No problem. Yeah, it might be a little bit longer come September, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. I guess we'll give it back to Becky here. We've hijacked her session.
Leave it to the Canadians to hijack a session. You can't throw him under the bus, though, Rick, because I have pictures of where your Canadian little sign ended up during our.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. From now on, I learned the lesson. I just carry the sign with me, right?
Just carry it around. All right. Well, we'll get rolling. So good morning. So well, I won't do an introduction. I think most of you know who I am. Becky Danielson, Chair of the Fall Protection Council. We have already done harness inspection. That's out on YouTube. And then the lanyard one should be coming out on YouTube shortly. So if you missed those, you can kind of take a look at that one. So today is SRLs, so self-protecting lifelines. Now, if I remember, and Jackie, you could correct me if I'm wrong, you have the webinar that we did, I believe it was last year or the end of the year before, that we did the ANSI update for SRLs with all the
Yes.
changes.
Yep,
And that
that
should
is
be out,
correct.
and that should be out as well, correct?
Yes, that is correct. And all of those are out there. I will post links to them in the chat. So if anybody wants to do a copy and paste on that, you're more than welcome to.
Perfect. And that'll kind of give you, we'll refresh on some of the updates, but that gives you a more detailed on the changes and kind of a dumbed down version of it. So when we look at SRLs, so the standard before 2021, and that just went into effect in August 1st of 2023. Now, I will say that not all manufacturers are there yet, but most of them are there. So the old standard had class A and class B. The new standard has class 1 and class 2. They took the class 1 and class 2 and they mirrored that from CSA. However, when you get into the description, this is where CSA and ANSI differ. So for a class 1, which would be any SRL that's anchored directly over your head, that's a class 1. Okay. Anything that's anchored at your D-ring or below is considered class 2. They removed the terminology leading edge out of the standard altogether. However, as we know it in the field, leading edge. So when we start looking at inspection of SRLs, and I had to borrow some SRLs because I don't have any anymore. Luckily, I know people that from my old days. So we have ones that are anchored like this one. I'm sure all of you will recognize this beauty. So this one anchors at the back of your harness, so at your D-ring. And these are called SRL-P. So in the old standard, it was SRL-R for retrieval, and then SRL-LE for leading edge. Now you have SRL, self-retracting lifeline. And for those of you who are kind of new to the SRLs in themselves, so SRLs are basically like, think of the seatbelt in your car. So Jason and I are driving along. Jason slams on the brakes. I don't have my seatbelt on. Where do I go? Right into the windshield, right? Smack, bust things up. Now, same thing happens. Jason driving along, slams on the brakes. I have my seatbelt on. Where do I go? I don't go very far, right? Because once that speed and that inertia hits, and my body's moving against that belt, it notices that speed and inertia and it locks off. So the SRL does the same thing. So if you're using the SRL, whether it's on your back or above, and you make that movement, that quick movement, it's based on speed and inertia, and it'll lock off. And I'll show you when we do an inspection quick. So that is the SRL. So just think of the seatbelt in your car. So we have SRL, SRL-P for personal, meaning they go on your back, and then SRL-R. So they removed the SRL-LE. However, in Canada, CSA still requires, so you're going to see when you see the labels coming out, if the manufacturer sells in both US, Canada, you're going to see both sets of documentation. And it'll probably get really tiny because each standard wants a lot of information on the label. And we'll talk about labels in a second. So when we look at SRLs, they're a little bit different than everything else that we've looked at, right? Because we're looking at synthetic fibers, we're looking at all that kind of stuff, right? And if you go back to the harness, we look at hardware, webbing, stitch patterns, labels, okay? So, and that kind of follows suit throughout all of the products. So if they're synthetic, we're looking at the same things. If it's hardware, then we're looking at those same things. Now, SRLs are a little bit different in that now we have a housing. So we're looking at, sorry, the lighting in this room is just atrocious today. So we're looking at hardware. So now we're going to look at, are there any big gaping holes on the side where the seams, because basically the housings are two pieces of plastic that come together. And typically they're going to be screwed, or they'll have like a special screw or a hex in there. So little ones, most of them all have 4. I will tell you this, that if you're in the field and all of a sudden you have an SRL that won't retract and it won't do either, it won't go back up in the housing, and you can't pull it out. If it does that, check and make sure that all of the screws are there. If a screw is removed, it won't work. So we look at the housing. So we're looking for cracks, anything that will allow any of the environment that we're working in to get inside of the unit. So you don't want any cracks. You want to make sure that all of your screws are still in place. And one of the most important things when we're looking at these SRLs, this one is a terrible, but so you'll have labels, right? And the label isn't, unlike all the other things that we have, the SRL or the lanyard and the harness, they're protected by a piece of webbing that wraps around. A lot of the labeling on the SRLs is right on the housing itself. So this is a lot of times where you see OSHA says the label has to be there and it has to be legible. This is where sometimes that problem comes into play, is that the environments that we're in, it keeps rubbing and wears off. Now, most SRLs you can send back to the manufacturer and you can get recertified. However, I say that, but any of the tiny ones or the personal ones that are web SRLs, they're not going to want that back. You're just going to end up having to replace that. And remember, anytime that we look at any equipment that fails the inspection, out of service it comes and gets destroyed. Or if it's a bigger SRL, cable SRL, then you send it back to the manufacturer or an authorized repair center to get repaired. If it's been impacted because of a fall, that's a different story. Then that comes out of service. It gets tagged right away, so no one else can use it, because that would be a very bad thing, right? And so we tag it, and typically you follow your company policy, and most company policies state that it goes back to the safety manager and they'll take care of it from there. Especially if you know it's been in a fall and it's been impacted. So when we look at SRLs, we're looking at the housing. So all the way around, making sure no one has dropped it off of 30-foot scaffolding onto the ground, right? And then once we get done looking at the housing, we're going to look at the labels, because they're all kind of right together. So the things that we're looking at on the label, making sure that we can still see the serial number, right? If that's not legible, you can't tie it back to its inspection record. And that's one of the things that no matter what investigator it is, that's the thing that they're going to look at if there was an incident, right? So, and I think in the standard, it calls out a unique identifying number, and most manufacturers use a serial number for that. So it'll tell you the date of manufacturer, it'll give you the model number, it'll give you the serial number, it'll tell you what the SRL is made out of, whether it's cable or webbing. So you'll see a lot of synthetic webbing that's out there, which I think you'll see a lot less of now with this new standard. You'll see a lot more cable, but you see webbing, and then you'll see cable. There are some manufacturers that make an SRL with a synthetic rope, which is kind of like a Technora rope. And typically what happens is it's rope outside of a really soft cable on the inside. So different types that it can be made out of. It'll tell you that on the label. It'll give you warning. It'll give you the maximum free fall distance. Both standards require it. It'll tell you what the weight capacity is. And remember, this is important. We talked about it both with harnesses and lanyards, making sure that every single component that you're using in your fall arrest system, from the anchor to your body support, to your connector, to your rescue, to everything, making sure that it's all rated for the weight of the person. And remember, most of them are, because the standard goes from 130 to 310, most of them are going to be that. And that's not just your weight, that's your weight with all the junk that you're carrying with you, right? So it's important to understand that and to be able to look and see and know where that is. So then we looked at the housing, we looked at the screws to make sure everything is still in. Make sure everything looks nice and pretty. If I can't read the label, out of service it comes. The other thing we talked about with harnesses and lanyards is you inspect prior to use by the user and annually, at least annually, by a competent person other than the user. Remember, we always want someone else looking at our gear, because we get tunnel vision. We look at it and we miss things. It's the same thing with reading a document 50 times, right? So then the other thing, and we'll put this out as well, is that the difference is that when it comes to inspection requirements for SRLs, that changed, but that changed back a while ago, back in 2018. So it's not just annually by a competent person other than the user, and that's a documented inspection. It is based on its usage. So there's a matrix in both CSA and ANSI, and they're both identical, that basically states, and we'll put this out there, you have this documentation, is that if you are using this maybe once a year, you take it out, and your maintenance guy use it on the roof, that's great. Then you do the inspection annually. So light and infrequent use, and they kind of give you like, if you're storing it properly, that kind of stuff. And the examples of, if you're a maintenance and you only use it once a year, then the inspection is annually. If you use it moderate to heavy, so like in transportation, residential construction, utility, so they give you examples in there, Then it's semi-annually to annually, so 6 months or a year. And then I would say anything in steel erection, commercial construction, oil and gas, mining, scaffolding, these get inspected quarterly. And that's a documented inspection. And the reason for the drive in this, so a while back, I would say it's probably been about 5 years now. There was a scaffold worker that went up on a scaffold structure and they never checked the SRL, never inspected it, fell because a platform fell out from underneath them. It broke and they fell to their death 26 feet. After that, it was probably about a year after that they started kind of driving this inspection and frequency, because we tend to, if we're using bigger SRLs in specific industries and we leave them out and we're leaving them out in the elements, or we leave them there for like 20, 30 days while we're working, the tendency is that when we go out, we don't check that. We just, it's there. Sweet. I'll hook it up and I'll go. And it happens every day. It happens in training. So really kind of driving that message about doing the inspection. And remember, in California, because of Cal OSHA, it's every 6 months, regardless of what these state. And both CSAs and ANSIs are they're almost identical. The only caveat with CSAs is that if all of that, you do that or whatever, they still have to go back per each manufacturer. They still have to go back and get recertified every 5 years. And that's based on manufacturers. So a manufacturer could say, I don't need to see it in 5 years, but CSA still left that verbiage in that matrix of inspection. And again, we'll post both of those out there directly from the standard for you so that you have it. So back to our SRL. So we're going to, if we're looking at the webbing, same concept with the harness and the lanyard. We're looking for any cuts, frays, holes, or anything that's going to affect the integrity of the webbing. So as we take this and we pull it out, we're inspecting all of that webbing. And all the SRLs have impact indicators now. Whether the impact indicator is an energy absorber that deploys, or whether it is, oops, as I make all this noise, whether it's in the hook. So if you look at the hook, and this one's not deployed, but it spins, and right here is where, if this were deployed, it'll pop and you'll see a little red ring. The reason that it's here is this is the part that we attach to us, right? So it's the first thing we're going to look at to see if that impact indicator has been deployed. The little web ones tend to have more of a energy absorber. So energy absorber, now if the energy absorber is coming out, starting to deploy, usually that happens when they throw it in the bottom of a job box and they start yanking and trying to pull all their stuff out of it. All of a sudden you'll see maybe an inch or two of the energy absorber start to kind of sneak out of its kind of casing. Oh, we got a question. We'll go here. Swing fall we'll talk about after we finish inspection. Where SRLs review? Yes, it does include personal SRLs. You're going to see more personalized. Now, there's some manufacturers that are working on whether it's a Kevlar blend, but because of the standard change, when the standard change for SRLs, they changed the testing for the class 2, and it is incredibly more stringent. They also added a test that tests the energy absorber wet, which was a new thing for SRLs. Both make a difference. but you'll see more cable class 2 personal SRLs, because personal SRLs are going to be class 2 from here on out in the US. This is not for Canada. Canada is going to be as it has been for now. I haven't heard of any, and Rick, you could probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't heard of, and I talked to a couple of people, I would say probably like 3 weeks ago, to see if there was any kind of change coming to the play, and not that they're aware of at this time. But that's not to say that ANSI couldn't change their mind at any time, or CSA can't change their mind at any time. Because remember, they meet in the fall and in the spring, so they'll be meeting again fairly soon, and that discussion could take place again. I do know some of the guys on CSA, and they kind of go to ANSI every once in a while, so it's always interesting to sit on both. So, and I'm kind of bouncing around just because of the new standard change, so, and not just, drilling on inspection, kind of bouncing around, so I apologize for that. It's not usually how I roll, but just trying to get all that information to you guys so that if it helps in any way, but yeah, so you'll probably start to see more cable, and then you'll start to see more manufacturers trying different types of materials that hopefully pass that leading edge test. So we've looked at the housing, we've read our label, made sure that we could still read it. So now, and hopefully you can see this. So I'll move this. Okay. Can you guys see that okay? Do I need to go closer? It's so tiny on my screen, I don't know what you can see. Okay. So when we have the SRL, the thing that we're looking at, so we're checking the gate, make sure it's dual action. Remember, that's part of the standard, both in Canada and the US. Dual action, so 2 movements to get it to open. We look at the impact indicator. This one is a leading edge, so it's going to have the energy absorber. Then you'll see there's swedging. So when you look at an SRL, you'll see that there's swedge right here. And so you always want to pull, and they're usually protected by some piece of rubber. You want to pull that up and make sure that you're checking that. Make sure that it hasn't loosened off or anything like that. Then you're going to take all this cable, whether it's a 30-foot SRL, whether it's a 50-foot SRL, whether it's a 100-foot SRL, you're going to take all the cable and you're going to pull it all the way out. Now, you'll notice I have what on? Although they're black, you can hardly see them. Gloves. So when we touch cable, we always make sure we have gloves on, because if the cable were frayed and we're letting it go back in, that's going to hurt on its way back in your hand. So we're going to take the cable all the way out, but as we do this, we're going to test it. And so you'll actually hear and feel those pockets lock off. Now, if I were to yank on this and it didn't lock off at all, which by the way has happened to me, you'll go forward because you can't just like kind of tug on it. It's based on speed and inertia, right? So you kind of have to pull hard on it. So if it doesn't lock off, it's just going to keep going and you're going to go forward. The other thing is that each manufacturer uses a different number of paws on the inside. So this SRL on one side of it has a giant spring that's wound tight in there. And each manufacturer sets theirs a little bit differently. But when they put the brake drum in there, it connects to that spring and then they tighten it. And that's the tension, the retention that it comes back at. So on the other side, usually typically in the housing, there'll be notches and then there's paws. So when I hit that speed and that inertia, then it locks off. And you have to, so you guys all know the terminology yo-yo, right? So that was way back in the day before they had kind of an anti-ratcheting. So yo-yos, so the SRLs back, this is way back when they first came out, that you would bounce, and if you bounced, it would recoil up and then you would hit it again and again and again, and that's why they call them yo-yos. However, as technology has changed and things have changed, now we have where you have to release it up a certain amount before it will release. So we're taking all this cable out. What are we looking for on cable, right? We're looking for corrosion. We're looking for any bird caging, any strands that have broken. So we pull all the way out. So now we're all the way out. And then we're going to slowly let it go back up into the housing. And when you're doing this, now you're checking that cable. This is why gloves are important. So you're just slowly letting that go back up into the housing. Now, the other thing, this is my favorite thing, is that, oh, rubber piece is funky. Let's see if I can get you a little closer. Okay, so, and this happens every single time I'm in the field. If you pull the SRL out, and typically not on ones with the energy absorber, but if you look at it and there's a kink right about here and right about here, I can tell you what they did with it. So they wrapped it around the bottom of the structure and they left it there. Now this does two things. One, it kinks the cable, and anytime we kink cable, we weaken the strength of it. Okay, so now we just weaken the strength of it because typically they're not going to just leave it there for a second. It's there for either overnight or while they go to lunch or whatever. Now, the other thing that's happening, not only are we kinking the cable and weakening the strength of the cable, but we're also letting the environments kind of get in on the cable, and that's going to go up into the housing and the brake drum. The other part is that this spring is that big spring up there. It's going to go, oh, I'm supposed to be like this. And pretty soon you're going to be letting that retract back, and about 5 feet won't go back into the housing because it thinks like it's supposed to be like that. So that spring gets a memory. Also, if you attach this to a trailer hitch of a truck and it takes off, you have a problem, right? Because what's going to happen? They're either going to take the SRL as a whole, or they're going to pull the cable all the way out of the SRL and break it, which has happened. One of my old companies had SRLs come back with no cable or been dragged back on a highway for 10 miles. So we've inspected the hardware. We've inspected the labels. We've inspected the housing. We've inspected the cable. If we find anything wrong with cable, bigger SRLs like this one, they go back and they get recertified. They'll open it up. They'll fix whatever's wrong. Come back to service. These little ones with webbing, they get cut up and thrown away. And here's why. By the time you open this, it costs just as much to replace it. So Jason, you wanted me to refer on swing fall. So the best description I have of swing fall is, here's the thing. And it's kind of wherever you're anchored to, you're going back to, whether you like it or not. Think of a dog on a leash. He runs, he's going back. And so, and you can, I mean, you think about it, it's just like a dog leash. You go to the end, you hit that speed, that inertia, it's going to bring you all the way back. The thing to keep in mind is that if I have a 50-foot SRL, and let's say that I'm on the top of a building and I walk out 50 feet and I'm walking along the edge because that's where I need to do my work. And I walk out 50 feet. So I'm anchored back here and I walk 50 feet. It's okay. It's against what the manufacturers state because you're only allowed 30 degrees. What does 30 degrees mean? For every 10 feet of cable, it's 1 step in any direction. Okay, so that doesn't really give you a ton of movement. So if I walk out 50 feet on a building and there's an edge there, okay, what I need to understand is that as soon as that locks off, how far out did I just walk? 50 feet. Guess what I just did to my clearance calculation? I better make sure that I have 50 feet from any obstruction below me, or I'm going to start hitting stuff. And to the swing fall point, I'm going to come back to where it's anchored to, right? So there are things that you really have to consider within all of that swing fall, and having an SRL that allows me to go 30 feet, 50 feet. I have to make sure that I understand that if I fall off, I got to make sure I have the clearance calculation. If I only have 20 feet of clearance and I just walked out 50 feet, guess what? I just hit the ground, right? So it's very, very important that, and don't get me wrong, we understand that we need to get to places, and I understand that, but you have to understand there's a consequence to every action that we choose, right? And so we have to understand that if I walk out 50 feet, I need to make sure that I have that clearance below me, not only the 50 feet, but the deployment of the energy absorber, because now I'm probably going to deploy that because I'm going over an edge, right? And how tall I am. Okay. So all of these things have to be kind of factored into that clearance calculation, and understanding that if I take that, because you give somebody a 50-foot SRL, they're going to go 50 feet. Yes. Some of the things that we've seen come back is my favorite are welders. I love them so much, but they actually hate the fact that the SRL locks off at a certain point because it's doing its job. And so they'll bring it out 10 feet and they'll clamp it off. First, the weld slag's getting on the cable that you have laying on the ground. Second, it's not going to work the way that it's supposed to. Third, now you have 10 extra feet that adds into that clearance calculation as well. So we talked about impact indicators on the cable SRL. So you'll see that there's, on most of them, it's an energy absorber, or they'll have like a little stitch with a little label folded in there that says, if you can read this, this has been deployed, just like lanyards. So not all manufacturers do it if they have an energy absorber on there, but a lot of them do. I know that Miller does. 3M doesn't, and I think there's a couple others that do. But most of them rely on the energy absorber. So if there isn't an energy absorber, because it's based in the housing, so the energy absorption is within the housing, and there isn't one, then there has to be that little stitch and a label that says this has been deployed. There has to be some way of saying this unit has been in a fall, or you jumped off the last 2 rungs of a ladder and you deployed the darn thing. All right. Oh, do we have another one? Is the anchor point for a personal SRL on the system scaffold still in no point? Depends on the manufacturer of the scaffolding. And you can pipe up and holler too. Here's the thing with fall protection, and everybody that's sat through any of my stuff understands that fall protection is a conversation. So you feel free to unmute and talk. I'm totally cool with that. But the biggest thing to understand is the changes within SRL, making sure that you're looking at the matrix for the inspection criteria, making sure that you're following the manufacturer's recommendations within that. So whether it's webbing or cable, we look at that. So again, you're looking at the hardware, the housing, the webbing. If it has energy absorbers or if it has any exposed stitch patterns, you want to make sure you look at that. When we look at any of the metal or the connecting points, we always want to make sure that we're checking its functionality, but rust, corrosion, anything that affects the integrity of the metal that will weaken the strength of it, then it comes out of service. So we always want to make sure we check that functionality, make sure that we don't have any of that rust, corrosion, or pitting. you can't see this one, but it's like full of rust on the inside. So make sure that you're checking all of the hooks and making sure that the energy absorbers, the casing around the energy absorber is still intact and not torn, ripped, shredded, coming out, that kind of stuff. What? There's another one. We will post the matrix out. Jackie, I think R&R has that, if I'm not mistaken, but it's straight out of the ANSI standard. So we should be able to.
Are we talking about the PowerPoint that you did for the last presentation?
Yeah, and it's in there, but just this documentation.
Okay. Yes, if
sent
it
it-
was.
I sent
if
it with the inspection docs.
Okay, yep, and I am going to get those posted to your website today, to your fall
Okay.
protection page. I'll do that
Yeah,
now.
so we'll have the inspection. It's just a generic inspection document, just to kind of give you a starting point. And then that matrix is also part of those documents. So there's the harness one, the lanyard one, the SRL one, and then the matrix that, and if you need to email me for it, I can get it to you too. No worries there. We'll make sure that you guys get all the information that you need. Does anybody else have any questions?
Morning, Becky. It's Harold. How are you?
Here we go. What's up, Harold?
Golly gee whiz. Question for you. When you say the inspection must be recorded, a lot of the labels documented. A lot of the labels have the little grids. Does that suffice?
Not on the SRLs.
Not on the SRLs, but I'm asking for regular webbing and lanyards, harnesses. Can you use that as that documented
No.
document? It still has to have a secondary.
Well, here's the thing. So I talked to some OSHA investigators, and what they said was, because of all of the different manufacturers are out there and all of them say something a little bit different, they're going back to, because people had spreadsheets and they were just pencil whipping them and just saying, yeah, everything passed. And so they're going back to, you either use the manufacturer's documentation, you create your own that shows that you know what you're looking for, or if you use a spreadsheet, you have to keep the manual for each different product, manufacturer's product. So if you have 5 different manufacturers of gear, you keep a manual for each one of them with somewhere that you have easy access with your spreadsheet, because they want to make sure that that you understand exactly what the manufacturer is saying that you need to look at.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Becky, I got a quick question.
Fire away.
Has anybody come across the fact that mixing and matching components from different suppliers for SRLs with different body harnesses, has anybody questioned that?
So here's the thing. This is where I love it, because it gets gray. So the way that we've always looked at things is that if they're tested to the ANSI standard or the CSA standard, that they can be mixed and matched. Now, this depends on the manufacturer. But what I will tell you is that most manufacturers are going to go back and say, I've tested my harness with my SRL. So Miller's tested their harness with their SRL. They don't go and buy 3M, MSA, Guardian, whatever. They're not a North, whatever. They're not going to go buy all those and test them. So when they go through that testing process, they're testing with their gear. That's not to say that you can't do it. It's just making sure that you're really paying attention to, do they meet the same standards? And there are, unfortunately, some players out there that have come up out of the woodwork, some of the tiny players that are coming in and, super cheap. I got this for like $50 on Amazon, right? And so you have that. And now I don't know if it's really bad. They say it's been tested to it. So it's just kind of it's a little bit of a learning curve, but most manufacturers state that if they meet the same standards, it's okay. However, they'll probably fall back on, we've only tested it with our gear. So we only know how this works with this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what you have to be careful too is a lot of those cheaper products, they're tested offshore, and a lot of them don't meet the same standards in North America.
Right.
So what we're doing now with our scaffolders is I've called in a 3M rep to come in, and just to be ahead of the curve, I guess we're going to go with one manufacturer's harness and one manufacturer's SRLs, no cross contamination with anything else. But the point I wanted to just let everybody know, nylon versus cable, the cost double pretty much. And for an SRL, yeah, they're not cheap, because I think it was probably about 5 years ago, Cubic Construction had a fatality. The worker had a All Fall Pro on, and he fell, but the nylon retractable portion cut on a piece of steel when he fell. So they switched to cable. All their SRLs are cable system now. And I've heard grumblings here, I don't know if it's just for BC, that they'll be looking for all cable systems eventually. I don't know what the time frame is, but we're just being proactive to get ahead of it now and getting away from the nylon and jumping right into the cable. But it's not cheap.
No, it's not. And one of the things with BC is they tend to mirror whatever ANSI is doing.
True.
So they'll tend to mirror kind of what's going on in the States. And we've been seeing that progression over the last probably 4 years, is really, because you think of any of that polyester or nylon, you put that under tension, you could cut that with a butter knife. I mean, it's so.
And the elements too wear on it quite a bit. The rain, the snow, and so they can degrade pretty quick.
Yep. And that's where inspection really comes into play, not just falling back on what the standard says, but understanding, we're using this in a harsh environment. Maybe we should be looking at this a little more often. And it's a pain in the butt to do it, but
I think eventually you're going to see cable system being mandatory for most of them.
Oh yeah.
It's coming. Yeah.
I think for many industries, I think there are some other industries that will probably still kind of keep that because they aren't in the same applications that. So every industry is just a little bit different. And then, not that we've all not done this before, but it would be neat to, no, it's not neat to open an SRL. Please don't ever open an SRL yourself. And here's why. It is very, very dangerous. And I can say this because I've had this happen near me. When I talked about that giant spring on the other side of the SRL, I'm not kidding. It's about this wide, and it's wound tight, and it's a heavy gauge metal. And so when that's wound in there, if you open this wrong and that's there, it'll spring out. It'll be a noise you never, ever forget, but it will actually cut you because it is incredibly sharp. So if it comes flying by you or at you, it's like a jack in the box. If you open this, that's why everybody, every authorized repair center, every team is trained to open these a certain way and very carefully. Even when I went through the training, I was like, just because I've heard that noise before and I really didn't want that thing flying by me. In training, they'll take one out and they'll just take a brand new one and they'll fling it. And it's incredibly dangerous. So no, we never ever want to try to open this and take a look, see what's going on. I will say that I've had quite a few years ago, if you get gravel in them where they kind of get funky, if you kind of just tap it, that sometimes we'll release it, not bang it, not throw it, just tap it. Sometimes that will kind of release it if there's things in there. But if there's things in there you can hear rattling, it's time for it to get recertified, right? So a lot of times what I'll tell people is if you're questioning it enough to say, hey, I'm going to ask somebody, you know what you need to do with it, right? You need to remove it from service and you need to either have it recertified or destroy it. And it's really important that we destroy equipment that has failed inspection because one man's trash is another man's treasure. And all of them have serial numbers and it's all logged back to whoever bought it. So make sure that you're destroying it and the best way to destroy big SRLs, if you want it destroyed like it's that bad, usually you'll send it in and they'll say, we can't repair this. And then they'll destroy it for you. You can't change the cable in it yourself. You can't change anything on it yourself. You can't modify any of these. You can't make them shorter, make them longer.
One more point to that. Just talking with suppliers and whatnot, a lot of them now have a buyback program. If you want to buy their specific harness and self retractables, they'll take your product. They give you like a $50 or $75 credit towards something new. And for future purchases too of them, they give you a discount on them. So which is pretty good deal.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 big players that do that right now.
Yeah.
Any other questions out there? Or did I put you all to sleep? I have a tendency to do that. Customer has a fall tech yo-yo anchored at their feet. It says leading edge. Site safety. Okay. Is there looking directly away from the anchors, the swing isn't there. I'm not sure I'm following the question. Is if you walk away from it, you are creating swing.
Does the person that asked that question want to just?
Yeah, do you want to unmute and walk me through it? Or not. That's okay too.
Oh, it says they can't unmute.
Oh, okay. This has to do with walking to the side only. It has to, so that it has to do with the clearance because you're tying off at your feet because you're creating, you have to get, so basically you're, and the 18 feet is more lanyard, not SRL. So you have the height of the worker, and remember, we're not all the same height. So you have the height of the worker. So if the SRL is anchored at our feet, think about this. So we're anchored at our feet. So it's the height of me. And then I have to fall past the SRL in order for the SRL to engage. Then once that engages, and each manufacturer's, you'll have to look at what their max arrest distance is. Because each manufacturer is a little bit different. Some will be like 24 inches, some will say 47 inches, some will say, so it really depends. So then you have to factor that into your clearance. So the height of the worker, bypassing it, and you usually give about 2 feet for that to kind of engage and lock off. And then if there's an energy absorber on there, you have to factor that in as well. So there's a lot of times they'll say there's an average of like, here's your worst case scenario. And for lanyards, I think it's like 19 and a half. And if you tie off at your feet with a lanyard, it's like 26. Yeah, 26 feet, 27 feet. So.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I think I figured out how to unmute. So.
Yay!
Unfortunately, I'm on my phone. We're at a writing conference for the Board of Certified Safety Professionals in Illinois. And so I didn't have a lot of time to research the question from the client, but this graph shows that if you're with a LE yo-yo, you're tied off at your feet. If you're the yo-yo is so many feet from the edge, but you can walk sideways, then they're telling you all these swing clearances that you need. But the client's saying, well, I'm not working off to the side, but the site safety person says, because I could work off to the side, I need these extra clearances. And the extra clearances just didn't make sense to me. And that's why I thought, well, I'll bring it up to you because I've watched a lot of your recordings and I like them.
Yeah, so this is kind of referring to that new, if you have it set back a certain distance, there's so many factors within this now. But the other thing is, are they choosing the right tool for the job? Should they just put something up that it doesn't allow them to go to the edge, right? It's a lot of times it's about choosing the right tool for the job. And big GCs are getting more and more educated, and sometimes too educated, and not necessarily understanding, but trying to minimize their liability.
Well, and that's what I assume. They're framers, so they're at the point where they're not to the point where they can put up the safety rails yet, because they're still working with the deck, where they still have, laying the decking out and everything to get to the edge where they could put up the handle.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
it was just kind of weird how Fall Tech put this graph in this new yo-yo that really, I'll have to drill into it more. It just didn't make sense to me, and I didn't know if you'd run into that before.
Yep, it's new. And if you need this out of the standard, I can send it to you if you send me an email. But it's out of the new standard, and you just have to, and there's so many, like I said, there's so many things that play into it. How far back is the SRL set? Maybe you need to set it back a little bit further if you can, or maybe choosing a different tool, maybe a smaller SRL. You know what I mean? Like, okay,
Yeah.
now it doesn't allow you to go as far, right?
Exactly.
So it's again, a lot of this comes back to, and you're going to see funky stuff like this kind of keep popping up because of the new standard. And there's a lot of manufacturers that are, how do I want to say this? Everybody's saying something a little bit different, which is really confusing. So you kind of have to maneuver your way through what the actual standard states and what all the manufacturers are trying to say. But it's really about choosing the right tool for the job. And sometimes you kind of have to think outside of the box a little bit.
Okay.
Hopefully that helped you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Anybody else? Well, alrighty then. I will not take up any more of your lovely Wednesday morning. Thank you for joining us. Next up is, I think we have vertical lifelines and anchors. Yay. So we'll see you in May, and I hope everybody has a safe day.
Thank you, Becky.
You bet. Take care.
Bye, guys.